2 decades, all that Issa Zaid has been able to do is look at his land from afar. Israeli settlers took over his land in 1998 and built on it. He says he hasn't been back since then. This is the Amona outpost, illegal under international and Israeli law. It's now subject to an Israeli court-ordered evacuation. Issa might get his land back, but the cost may be too much.
They leave this settlement but are preparing nearby Palestinian lands to transfer the settlers. This is no solution. We want them to leave all our lands for good, not to move their homes from Issa's lands to Muhammad's. We want to be able to access our land and use it again.
This is a tiny outpost with about 330 settlers. In the occupied West Bank and Jerusalem, 630,000 settlers live in Palestinian territory. Right-wing Israeli politicians are angry with the government and the High Court for ordering the eviction.
There are harsh feelings. I spent the night here, and everyone's feeling is that except for some foreign Israeli haters and left-wing radicals, no one here is happy. It's a plot, and unfortunately they're going to uproot a Jewish community in Greater Israel for no reason at all. It hurts a lot.
Settlers from Amona are likely to be moved to other Palestinian land in the occupied West Bank. But what has really drawn Palestinian anger is not Amona. Israel announced on Wednesday that 3,000 new settler homes are to be built. That's on top of the 3,000 announced last week.
This latest massive frenzy of escalation in settlement activities within less than 2 weeks of the Trump administration's taking office is very clearly a signal to the rest of the world to say that they have American approval and that Israel is very busy creating facts on the ground to prevent the establishment of a viable Palestinian state and therefore to destroy the chances of peace.
The Palestinians are rapidly losing hope. President Donald Trump hasn't condemned these new settlements, and it's clear that the US has changed its policy. That means a solution to this decades-old conflict is as far away as ever. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, occupied West Bank.
Well, illegal Israeli settlements have expanded into Palestinian territory at a rapidly increasing rate over the past few decades. Israel has built 147 settlements in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. And the number of people living there has more than doubled in the past 30 years. There are around 400,000 settlers living on Palestinian territory in the West Bank, with another 200,000 in East Jerusalem. But some of them are living in settler outposts. Nearly 100 have been set up in the West Bank without the approval of the Israeli government. The Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has repeatedly said that he's against these outposts. That's the same stance taken by his predecessor, Ariel Sharon. But members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, have been pushing to legalize these outposts. All right, time for us to introduce our guests now. In Jerusalem, we have Mitchell Barak. He's a public diplomacy analyst at Kivon Global Research and a former speechwriter for the former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. In Ramallah, we have Hanan Ashrawi, executive committee member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO. In London, we have Daniel Levy, president of the US Middle East Project. Welcome to you all. Can I start with you first, Mitchell? Why does Israel continue to flout what is recognized international law? I'd just like to quote the last UN Security Council resolution 2334, December 2016. Settlements have no legal validity and constitute a flagrant violation under international law. So why do it?
Well, whether the UN declared it illegal or not is not so relevant. They've declared all of Jerusalem illegal. from the Israeli perspective. And I think you didn't quote what the latest President of the United States and his new ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said, which is, we're not going to stand for this anymore. We're not going to have these Israeli, anti-Israeli resolutions, and we're going to maybe take away funding from the United Nations. So I don't think that's what you want to focus on. There is contention. The settlement issue is a contention. It is a negotiation issue between Israelis and Palestinians. The Israelis for the past 50 years have been settling and moving Israeli citizens in there. And we just saw this week that the court in Israel declared that certain land that was built 20 years ago belonged to Palestinians, and the Prime Minister sent in the army
you're referring
and sent
to
in the
Amona.
police
You're
to enforce that, sending a very, very correct.
The outpost of Amona.
Correct.
That was a distraction, though. That was the Israeli government inviting in the international media to see scenes of conflict, which of course we love, to distract from the more serious issue, that of the announcement of an establishment of a new settlement, an entirely new settlement, the first for almost 20 years. That's what Amona was about.
Well, Amona was about, the government had supported it a number of years ago, thought that it was legal. Israeli organizations with Palestinians brought a case that said that the land belonged to someone else. It went through a legal system. Israel recognized that there may be issue with the provenance of that property and of that land. And Israel said, even though there have been people living there and families living there for 20 plus years, we have to get out and destroy it. This was not a media circus, and this was something that actually is very, very damaging internally to the Prime Minister, to Prime Minister Netanyahu. And although I am oftentimes a critic of him, this was a very, very difficult move for him within his coalition and within his right-wing base. People look at those pictures and they are saying, Netanyahu is not fit for leadership if he's going to remove Jews from their home in the Jewish land and destroy a synagogue.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about that later, if you don't mind, Mitchell, but thank you. Hanan Ashrawi in Ramallah. Palestinians must be in a state of despair to hear the announcement of the establishment of a brand new settlement. Not only have existing settlements been increased in size, new announcements have been made in the past 2 weeks, but a completely new settlement having being announced must actually must go really to the heart of what the Palestinian cause is.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just adding insult to injury. It's not just flouting international law and the will of the international community. And I have news for your previous guest. International law applies to everybody. And Israeli impunity must end. And settlements are illegal by all laws, by the Fourth Geneva Convention and by international humanitarian law and international law. And therefore, not only are they an obstacle to peace, they are outright land theft of land that doesn't belong to Israel at all.
Okay, Doctor.
And therefore, it's not a question of being desperate and looking at what Israel is doing. It hasn't been 2 weeks since the inauguration of the new president, whom Mitchell thinks is his reference, and Israel has declared more than 6,600 new settlement units in already existing settlements, a tremendous expansion and escalation.
All right, Dr. Ashrawi.
At the same time now it has declared, this is an alarming escalation, declaring a new settlement.
Okay, can I now ask you about the Palestinian leadership response? President Abbas says we have started urgent consultations in order to take the necessary measures to confront settlement activities. I mean, that's hardly a robust response that the people of Palestine want to hear in the face of all of these announcements that have been made in the last 2 weeks.
Absolutely. I think what we need are very clear steps to bring Israel to compliance with international law. According to the Rome Statute, the settlements are a war crime. And therefore, now it's up to the International Criminal Court to hold Israel accountable, its government and its settlers, for stealing other people's land, for bringing in their own population into occupied territory and violating the Charter of the UN, the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war. Now, this is one thing. The ICC is important, And I think the signatories, the high contracting parties of the Fourth Geneva Convention, have to undertake their responsibilities. I think Israeli impunity must end. And, of course, the EU, the European Union, and other countries that have declared their commitment to the two-state solution cannot stand by and watch Israel destroying the two-state solution by expanding and taking over the Palestinian state. And therefore, there have to be punitive steps and measures in order to tell Israel that there is a price to be paid and it cannot continue to challenge not just the will of the international community and the requirements of peace, but international law whose provisions are very clear about settlements.
All right.
And if you want peace, you cannot allow Israel single-handedly to destroy the chances of peace.
All right. Daniel, coming to you, why, remind us why the continuation and this declaration of intent that we've heard from the Israeli government, and why this is so damaging then to prospects for peace, and why many are very alarmed by this expansion of settlement activity.
There may be a quantitative uptick in what the Israeli government has announced, but this is just the continuation of an ongoing policy. The difference this time is less about numbers, I would argue, Martine, than about the role that the Trump administration appears to be having in tipping the scales on a tactical dispute inside the Israeli government between those like the Prime Minister who, because strategically they agree on the strategy of dispossessing the Palestinians, making sure that the Palestinians will neither have equal rights nor sovereignty. But tactically, Netanyahu has said the best way to do this is to play a game of deception. Let's pretend we're ready for peace while making sure that two states is impossible on the ground. His tactical disagreement with those further to the right inside the coalition has been that they would argue, let's embrace our victory, no longer play the game of two states, and let's openly annex, let's build everywhere, and let's get beyond this pretense of two states. And I think the international community outside of America, to an extent, is concerned at this overreach because it could unravel the entire, let's face it, not successful peace process that we have had, but has been a useful managing device, which is why the question here is more about what Israeli overreach, apparently with support of Washington, will beget. There's no inevitability that this will lead to a fall, but the kind of things that Hanan has outlined, if there is a robust response that is not all about saying, okay, how can we get back to negotiations? But it is about saying, how do we hold Israel to account? Is this an opportunity, a better environment against which to mobilize and rally Palestinian non-violent civil disobedience, international mobilization, and to generate pressure that is not going to be self-generating, not only, if I just add, not only in Europe, but let's also remember that the Arab states will have to be embarrassed into stepping up their game when it comes to this issue as well. And perhaps this could generate a rethink inside Israel.
All right, Daniel. Let's go back now to Mitchell in Jerusalem. And Mitchell, maybe this is just a theory that American opprobrium and disapproval from the White House is actually a useful tool for the Netanyahu government, or his role within the government. It helped him manage the far right with a compliant, completely approving White House. Mr. Netanyahu has nothing with which to manage the far right wing of his coalition.
I mean, I think that the fact that he's done this now, just a few weeks before he's going to Washington for the first time to meet President Trump, and just a week or two after President Trump has taken office, is very, very significant. And it tells us how the U.S. administration feels about this issue and how they're either going to be willing to let it continue or support it in some ways. And I think that's also an opportunity, though, meaning it does help him. I'll agree with you that it does help him internally politically, because he's able to build more on the one hand, but the difficulty of dismantling a settlement is problematic. But, I think we're missing a point here in that, yes, it is a continuation of Israeli policy, but the vast majority of these housing starts are within the existing blocks, consensus blocks of Israeli settlements, meaning Gush Etzion, Ma'ale Adumim, and Ariel. And most Israelis, even to the left of center, even the left of center parties, believe that those blocks will remain in any future agreement, any discussions about a Palestinian state. So it's not out of the ordinary, this announcement. The numbers might be. The fact that, he announced a new settlement. Already, I believe his Attorney General said this morning, or the court said this morning, that he can't make a new settlement. And when we're talking about a new settlement, we're talking about 30 or 40 families. But even so, they've said that he can't do it. But I think there's a real opportunity here, meaning if the United States is backing Israel on the issue of Jerusalem, let's say, or on the issue of building within the consensus settlement blocks, then what are the Palestinians going to ask for? What are the Palestinians going to do to now have the U.S. pressure Israel to get to the table? And I think the U.S. is going to be very short on patience when it comes to the Palestinians, when it talks about violence, when it talks about not renouncing terrorism, and when it talks about supporting the families of people that have committed terror acts in a pension fund. They're not going to pay for that.
Let's put that question to Hanan Ashrawi then in Ramallah. What is the Palestinian leadership's plan? How is it going to deal with this new playbook? There's a new administration, and conventional American positions seem, and I say seem because we actually don't know for sure, but they seem to have altered.
Yes, certainly there is a deafening silence from Washington. Normally, at least they paid lip service to the fact that settlements are illegal and an obstacle to peace. And when you see Netanyahu and his coalition government escalating at such an alarm, and to finish the two-state solution, at least previous administrations used to condemn, used to denounce, used to send messages, used to say this is not acceptable, you have to stop this, it will destroy the two-state solution, and so on. But I'd like to clarify that there is no such thing as consensus settlement blocks. We haven't agreed to any settlement blocks or individual or even the settlement outposts, which according to the Mitchell report and the roadmap, were supposed to be dismantled 15 years ago at least. They're all illegal because they're all built on Palestinian land. That's to show how difficult and traumatic and painful it is, and you don't know how difficult and painful it is for Palestinians in captivity whose lands are being taken and stolen, whose homes are being destroyed, whose lives are being destroyed. So let's look at things accurately now. Our position is that we've negotiated the two-state solution to the point where even public opinion is totally inflamed because they feel that negotiations have been used by Israel as a means of buying time and getting cover to continue with settlement expansion, land theft, and resource theft. What we have to do is continue with these policies. That negotiations are not an excuse for a state solution, and therefore there have to be punitive measures. Okay. Without accountability, you cannot move ahead.
You've made that point already, but can I ask you then about yourself, about the senior...
Yeah, but you asked me the same question again.
The Palestinian leadership. I'm hoping to get more of an answer this time. It's singularly failed, the Palestinian leadership has singularly failed to provide a modicum of hope for the vast majority of Palestinian people, most of whom are very young. They have no prospects. They have for education, for jobs, for the ordinary life expectations that young people would have. Isn't it time then for the Palestinian leadership to hold elections, for President Abbas to step aside and allow for a new leadership to take the helm in this, what we've all agreed, I think, is a new era?
Let me say, the Palestinian leadership has taken of peaceful negotiations to end the Israeli occupation and to build the Palestinian state. Have any takers for this? Israel proceeded to act unilaterally and destroy the two-state solution. The international community paid lip service to it, and it was a very convenient tactic in order to say we're for the two-state solution, so God's in his heaven for, are largely a result of the state of captivity we're in. We don't have freedom of movement. We don't control our land, entrance and exit. We don't control our resources. We cannot even protect our own people. The Palestinian security is held responsible for the safety of Israeli army. Have now a sense of total disillusionment by the young people. They feel that this agenda has failed. They're looking for an alternative agenda, yes. And I agree we should have, first of all, reunification between Gaza and the West Bank. We should have a revival of a democratic process and practice of democracy by having elections, by reforming our institutions and so on. And having a new leadership, I agree. But all these things are not capable of lifting the Israeli occupation singularly, of ending the state of captivity and enslavement, of changing the policies of Europe and now the US, and cannot change the context within which we live.
Okay.
Of course, we will try different ways. We will try to reach out, but and there is, of course, popular nonviolent resistance.
Sorry to cut you short, Dr. Ashrawi, but Mitchell,
okay.
I think you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, no, I mean, just one point in the I know we're in the 14th year or 13th or 12th year of Abbas's 4-year term, but during that time, Prime Minister Sharon, I worked in his office, I was a speechwriter to Ariel Sharon, he left Gaza. Meaning when you talk about reunification of Gaza, you want the Israelis to go back. Israel left Gaza. Now, there's not a lot of peace that comes out of Gaza, okay? Israel has left Gaza.
That's a total
myth. You want to talk...
I'm sorry,
I know.
That's a total myth.
I know. It's a myth, but there's no Israeli soldiers there. There's no Israeli settlements there.
Okay.
And when
you control airspace, let me explain this, because this myth has been perpetuated for a long time. Look, when you control the airspace, when you control the entry and exit points, when you control territorial waters, and when you regularly bomb and kill, and you daily have encroachments and killing, what you have is a system of control.
I'm sorry, I have to interject here.
But Dr. Ashrawi, we don't control. We don't. We don't control the tunnel space. We may control the airspace, but we don't control the tunnel space. And you keep digging those tunnels underneath.
And I'd like to ask Daniel, finally, Rex Tillerson has just been sworn in. What do we expect? What can we expect? Is it likely to be, as we suspect, that this will be completely pro-Israel and will not be pursuing the peace negotiations that have long been off the table?
If indeed the President, Donald Trump, and his team have an interest in a deal, as he has occasionally suggested, then you don't get a deal by simply signing up to one side's positions. So they will have to go through a rather rapid learning curve in terms of what is needed on the Palestinian side for a deal. It could be that Secretary of State Tillerson, SecDef Mattis, inject a different position into the debate inside the administration. Mattis, at least when he was in the military as head of CENTCOM, understood how important to American national security interests not simply aligning with Israel is as a position. And it could be that Benjamin Netanyahu overreaches and does what he has done with many other leaders, which is to lead them to not trust him.
Okay.
Parking all of that, I don't think we should assume any of that. The thing we should assume is that President Trump does not operate in a vacuum. So the way in which the Palestinians do decide whether to unify, what strategy to pursue, the way in which American society decides or not to push back on this issue, the way in which other international actors are pressured by their own constituencies, all of that will have an impact. And all of that will ultimately tell us what is the environment in which Trump and Netanyahu will operate. But let me be clear.
Well, Daniel,
this latest move on settlements.
Daniel, I'm so sorry. We've really enjoyed your contribution, Daniel, and Dr. Ashrawi, thank you very much indeed, and Mitchell Barak, thank you all very much. But there's always so much to say on this particular issue. And of course, thank you for watching. If you want to see the programme anytime again, you can go to our website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, I'm sure you will, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on Twitter, our handle @AJ Inside Story. From me, Martine Dennis, and the whole team.